questions about. We've been asking questions and getting some answers, I hope, and digging into some difficult, challenging questions. This time around, we're going to ask probably one of the toughest of all questions, especially for somebody who believes in God, a Christian, the question about the resistance of evil and suffering. And this usually generates big questions. The question is, evil, why does God allow it? Pretty straightforward question, but it challenges people a lot. And I'm suspicious, just based on some of the things we've talked about before, you guys might have some questions about evil, what God's doing with evil, what evil is all about, and where it fits. So, what kind of questions do you guys have about evil and suffering in the world?
I have a question.
You've got one, Linda. All right. Okay.
I can't understand why God allows, or maybe I'm putting this the wrong way because I get confused about a lot of this, but how can He let so many people, so many children suffer from cancer and all of the despicable things that they suffer with when they haven't sinned, they haven't harmed anyone?
Okay.
Why would He allow that?
That's a great question. You're right. It's right smack at the heart of this whole thing. Yeah, we see innocent children who are, just not old enough to be naughty.
Right.
Well, we can debate that. But innocent children who are experiencing cancer or severe, difficulties, and it doesn't make sense. Why should that be? That's exactly the part of what we're asking here. All right? Good? Other thoughts you guys have?
Do you have an answer
Questions?
for it?
We're going to talk about it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, George.
My question derives from the first one. We all know the book of Job, when he went through all the problems he had and to measure his faith and his love for God and everything. And we all know that a lot of things, a lot of suffering in our life as a Christian, it's because to grow us, to make us closer to God and stronger for God, and to kind of, sometimes it's to test our faith. But is it all about testing our faith, or sometimes it's just because evil is out there and it just happens?
Sometimes feels that way, doesn't it?
It does.
Yeah, I think we have to be really careful with the idea that this is just to test our faith or to grow us. You need to be very careful with that. I'm personally not real fond of that, but I don't want to get too much into the answers, but that's a very good question. What you're experiencing there is kind of one of the attempts to try to make sense of this. In the face of this kind of suffering that Linda was talking about, children suffering, we'd say, well, there's got to be a reason. And we try to come up with answers. And one of the answers that people come up with is, well, it's to test me, to grow me. And we'll see how legitimate that is. We'll think about that. Good question. All right? So, Tabitha, what do you think? What are some of your thoughts just in response to this whole question of evil and suffering and things in the world?
I don't believe that God, conflicts, evil, into our lives, but I believe that without suffering, we wouldn't grow.
Okay.
I think even Jesus had suffering, but everyone looked up to him because he knew how to deal with it, how to handle it, and I think that's what the main part of church is for, so you can be taught how to handle it, how to deal with it.
Okay, so how to come to terms with those unfortunate, unpleasant parts of life, or the suffering in life. We come to terms with that and looking at what Christ has done with that. I agree. I think Christ is critically important, but I think I'll probably agree with you for a little different reason. I think Christ does transform our suffering and put a different spin on it. You also made another point, which I think is interesting, about God not necessarily inflicting the evil or bringing the evil. So where's the evil come from? That's one of those big questions. Well, if it doesn't come from God, then the quick answer is, well, it must come from Satan. But then that creates problems sometimes for people too. And I think that's creating a problem for you, it sounds like.
Well, I don't really believe in evil or hell or anything like that. I mean, Christian scientists believe that it doesn't exist.
Right. It's the negation of good,
Right.
the absence of good, rather than being a positive force.
If God is everywhere, therefore there is no evil.
Right. And I'm familiar with that teaching, and I obviously would not agree with that part of that. Because I think well, we'll talk about this more too, but so the point you're kind of bringing up is maybe evil, if God is present everywhere, then what we need to really thinking about is the absence of good and how we bring good to bear more, and we don't think about evil being a positive force, because then that would give it existence. And yeah, that's one of those attempts that try to come into terms with this. It really is. That's another way to try to, we'll just say, well, it's not there. All right, we'll probably come back to that. All right, George?
If people that believe that there is evil out there in the world, and we also believe that God is omnipowerful and He's the only God, and everything else is below Him, and why does God allow evil out there? I mean, if evil didn't come from God, like we said, but it come from Satan or whoever, and why does God just say, Satan, stop and don't hurt these people because they're mine? I mean, can they just God say that because He's the God? I mean,
good question.
you know.
Good question. I mean, that's right smack in the center of everything we're talking about here. And we'll postpone the answer for a bit. Linda, you had another question too?
This is maybe on the same lines as children suffering, but not exactly, because I have a question. I don't even know how to put this. All right, take like the recent storms that we've had, where people have had so much damage, you know, and I was one of them that had a lot of damage, and I can't help but think or wonder, how does God decide who's going to get the damage and who isn't, and who's going to be sick all the time and who isn't going to be sick?
Yeah.
You know, I mean, it's just blows my mind.
Mine too. It's an awesome question, and it seems arbitrary. And if it's not arbitrary, that means God must be behind it. But then, how's He choosing, and what's He up to? And boy, it's a tough thing.
It's crazy.
It can be. That's why I'm saying these are hard questions.
There has to be a devil, though, right? Wasn't the devil an angel that fell from grace?
That's what the Scripture gives us, and that's what we've been taught. Yes.
That's what I meant.
That's
not,
right. Yeah,
not to contradict anybody else, but that's what I thought I read.
Yeah. Well, we'll have to figure out what to do with the devil too, and where to fit him in here.
Ship him somewhere else.
All right. All right. I think we got some good questions here going, and these are legitimate questions. You guys are articulating very well a lot of the struggles people have with the suffering and evil, and I think we're going to be able to address some of this. Probably not answer all your questions, but maybe address some of it. So let's do that. All right?
Okay.
Okay.